I would like to thank also Professor Yu Namba of Toyo University, because Toyo University is also going to be cooperating with us on this program. And it is always good to have people with academic background, especially from Japan, where municipal PPPs have been a core of their approach for a long time. And Professor Namba heads the PPP program, graduate program at Toyo University. I would like to say thank Rupa Nair, who is going to be the coordinator of this program during the year. She's joining us from Singapore, and a WAPPP member, as well as Jean-Christophe Barth and our executive director, Liliana Farhat, who is organizing these things for us. And last but not least, in a big way, Jyoti Bisbee, who is the dynamo of our organization in so many ways. Jyoti is, I will not do justice introducing her. I'm trying to find the words, but I will not be able to do justice introducing Jyoti. Jyoti, why don't I let you introduce yourself, if you don't mind? But I just want to say that Jyoti has a lot of experience in United Nations, the World Bank. She's a member of our WAPPP Executive Committee, member of the Steering Committee, and many other things. So Jyoti is going to be moderating the session today. Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you, Ziad. I think I will leave my introduction for now and actually introduce our speakers, our panel of speakers, which in itself is just a stellar cast for this, really the launch session of this very important discussion. And I welcome all the attendees as well. I see we have about 60 people joining so far, so we can tell how important this topic is. So I think, let's recap this. We are joining all of us today to discuss this topic of small scale PPPs. While large projects get all the attention, with most policies and guidelines designed to prepare and transact such large scale projects, small scale projects are generally not given attention. And the reality is that they are not the same. And as we will hear from speakers, classification of small scale PPPs really hinges on multiple aspects. Should the definition of a small scale PPP be limited to the financial magnitude of the investment, or it should encompass additional criteria? So let's hear from speakers on this question. How about where does the project originate from, whether it's national government, local government, subnational? When we started this topic discussion back in November, we actually launched a very quick survey, and we on LinkedIn, and the result of the survey is right here. If everybody can see this, so we received about 177 votes, and most of the people voted for the project size or the capex of the project itself as the main defining factor for a small PPP. Next one was project structure, complexity, even if it's a small project. Some of these projects are actually, a lot of these projects are very complex. And then whether the project is sitting at the national government or the federal government or central government or at the local government level, or whether and then lastly, it was whether it's a user payment or a government pay kind of a project. So this kind of sets the stage in terms of, where we stand of the market's thinking. It's a very unscientific survey, but it gives us an idea. So let me move to the speakers today, and let me introduce. So we are very fortunate to have a panel of experienced professionals. They are ready to delve into these critical dimensions of small-scale PPPs. So first we have, and I will ask my colleague Rupa, who I cannot thank enough, and Liliana and JC and Ziad, you also, in putting this together, this very ambitious small scale PPP discussion series. If Rupa can please pin all the speakers so we can all be on the same page. So let me start with Mark. Mark is our colleague in WAPPP. He's the chair of the legislative chapter. He has over 35 years of experience. He's also the general secretary of the UNECE, International Center of Excellence in PPP policies, laws, and institutions. He's worked across 20 countries, and I'm sure that's probably underestimating it. We know Mark very well for many, many years, and he's a cherished colleague in the WAPPP community. Then we go to Peter Kabuki. He's a chief executive officer at Streamstone Africa. It's a Kenya-based infrastructure advisory firm offering project finance, PPP, sustainability, and early stage project structuring solutions. And he has over 20 years of experience in project development. And then we go to Senida. Senida is Albania's former deputy prime minister and member of the parliament. She is a development economist and policy advisor, and she brings over 23 years of expertise to PPPs and public procurement legislation. Then we have Nathaniel, head of structured finance at Gauteng Infrastructure Financing Agency. He's been an investment banker for over 20 years and been working in corporate finance, project finance, and lately infrastructure project preparation and financing. And then we have Jan, also a very respected colleague in WAPPP. He heads the Balkan and the European chapter of WAPPP, and he's an advisor at the National Center for Privatization and PPPs in Saudi Arabia. He's on secondment there. He has been previously in EBRD leading policy development capacity building initiatives across over 57 countries, specializing in PPPs and public financial management. And then we have Saeed. He's a PPPs expert, leading and managing multi-billion-dollar PPP initiatives in Alberta, Canada, and at the same time, many small projects. So it will be interesting to hear from him the contrast between these kind of projects. And Dr. Zaidi serves as the chairperson, actually, of UNECE, Bureau of the Working Party on PPPs, who is actually our partner in this initiative of small-scale PPPs. So I'm really, truly privileged to moderate this distinguished panel. Each member has an extensive career. I have not really covered their entire career history, but please feel free to read about all of them and reach out to WAPPP for additional interest in their experience. For the audience, I want to make sure it's great to see such great attendance for today's session. Just housekeeping details, please keep the chat going. We want to hear from you. I will also participate in chat as I get time. But my colleague Rupa is going to keep the chat going. Introduce yourself from where you're from. And if you have a question for the panel, please post it on the question board as well. And if I can ask everybody to please keep their mics mute and cameras off, just to give the bandwidth to people who may actually face some technical issues down the road. I personally am in the middle of a snowstorm here. I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and it's completely white out, not even a soul outside, not even one bird. It's that cold and that's white outside. So welcome to the inaugural roundtable. And so the way we're going to run this today's session is we are going to basically give 2 minutes each to each speaker. And it will be a rapid fire question Q&A. And there are 5 basically characteristics which we are going to go through of small scale PPPs. One is the definition. Second is the sustainability. and then is the financing, then is the policy, and then success factors. So let's see how much we can actually cover in the next 75 minutes. And if we can have all the speakers on one screen pinned, is that possible? I don't know, Rupa, if it's possible to have all the speakers on one screen. Maybe not. It's okay. It's okay. So let's start delving into the first theme. So Jan, I will start with you. How do you define small scale in the context of public-private partnerships, and what criteria are used to distinguish these projects from large-scale PPPs? Can you elaborate on the scope of small-scale PPPs in terms of project size, investment requirements, geographical region, potential impact areas from your own experience? You have 2 minutes. After Jan, we'll go to Senida, and then Mark, and then Peter, and then Nathaniel, and then Saeed. Over to you, Jan.
Jyoti, thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me. It's very funny, if you talk about PPP projects, large PPP projects, nobody asks about the definition. But if we have small PPPs, everybody is wondering, where are we? So I would say PPPs are PPPs. Risk assignment, a financial model, availability, quality to people. What it makes it small is probably the financial size, and also the size, also the geographic position. It's probably not on a national level, but it's on a smaller scale. But rounding up, say, and within those 2 minutes, I said, don't worry too much about the definition of small PPPs, because we don't worry about big PPPs either. And just scale down the effort you have to do to develop a PPP based on the financial size, the technical size, and maybe the geographic position. I hope that's a little bit of an answer to your question.
Thank you, Jan. Over to you, Senida.
Thank you very much. And yeah, it's fun to be here and to share some of my experience. It looks like that despite of my experience in government, in PPP, I do have less, but for sure, I have an experience in good governance and in policy. And I was struck by the pool that you already presented us, because by definition, it goes more than 70% the scale, how big is the project to define. And by definition, it looks like the small PPP should be smaller in amount. For me, rather, if you talk about small PPP, I don't mind the value %, but I mind mostly the impact that it will be for that kind of geographical area, which I do agree that will be something small, subnational, national, or local governance. I would look rather for the impact, how fast you can achieve the impact, and how much the local community, including the local business, can be involved in these small PPPs. For me, it's very much important to include a lot and much more of the private capital, because I would like to share you only 2 values. It looks like that only 15% of these SDGs are achieved according to the last estimation, September last year. But if according to OECD, we need $3.9 trillion per year investment to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And if we see the size of assets that we can invest globally, we go roughly 200 up to 300 trillion of possibilities in asset to investments. But not of these all investments are going to sustainable development projects. So I would like to really connect the small PPPs in terms of even how much they have the impact in achieving the SDGs.
Thank you, Senida. Very interesting responses so far already on this question. Over to you, Mark.
Well, thank you. From our side, I'm just representing the Center of Excellence on Policy Law Institutions. And when we had to work with UNICE, what we did was to look at all kind of PPP to extract what could permit to develop large and small scale. And out of that, what is good nowadays is that UNICE and the member state have now a definition of what is PPP. And from there, and PPP only for the SDGs and climate, not for other kind of PPP. From there, the question is, what is specific for small scale? Now, in terms of definition and core principle, we don't see anything very specific. What is certainly specific is that there are currently many small-scale PPP going on around the world at a municipal level or at a regional level. And what is specific in our view is that those PPP are PPP which address the same kind of issue. In a municipality, you have the same issue at the other municipality. In a region, you have the same issue at the region. So then there are much more practice on small-scale PPP than on large PPP. So then we see ourselves a big potential on aggregating all those practices of small scale from project to project. A municipality see the other municipality, they do things together. Myself, I am now living in a small city. A few days ago, I specialized a meeting with the head of the city, and he told me, look, we would be most happy to develop those projects. We have developed some of them, but what we do is we exchange with others. So there is a lot of potential, and much more potential of small-scale PPP to develop if we put together a good framework for them.
Thank you, Mark. Peter, over to you.
Thank you. I think for me, I'd really like to say that this conversation is very timely for our part of the world. And it's interesting because the focus here, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, has been for the last 10, 15 years on large-scale PPP projects. And I think definition does help us to begin to make a move, in focusing on what can really affect communities at the, basic level. Interestingly, in this region, we have small-scale PPP defined in different ways. You find definition through value. For instance, in Tanzania, they have what they call small and micro PPP provisions in the PPP Act. And this defines it as anything below 4.5 billion million US dollars, 4.5 million US dollars. In Uganda, again, a value-driven assessment at $6.5 million, sorry. But I think what is more important is that the definition has allowed some of our nations to move faster and be more effective in providing services at the community level. For instance, in Uganda, they have gone ahead and not only defined it by value, but put a very clear implementation framework, including an institutional framework where we have a small-scale PPP unit within the finance ministry that's involved in being the custodian of the project pipeline, and also capacity building within the private and public sector. And what we are seeing is, because of that, then there is good progress in providing small-scale PPP projects in energy, in healthcare, in sanitation at community level. When you come to a place like Kenya, what we've done is, after 10 years of having a PPP Act, in 2023, we had an amendment that introduced the capacity for subnational governments to engage in PPP. But what we are seeing is that there is little guidance in terms of a framework and in terms of a process plan, so that it's still very quiet. And so for me, I feel definition is very important, because it does help them to begin to focus resources, to begin to focus attention, so that we're able to define what constitutes a small-scale PPP, and then that helps our especially subnational governments to have guidance on how to put these in motion. So we're really looking forward to these engagements, and to see how then we can also then advise or help our entities in this part of the world to then be able to clearly define and put in place systems that will help us be able to drive this forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Very good context to the region as well in your response. Nathaniel, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. So on our side, just to put context again, if you are to look at the history of PPPs in South Africa, between 1998 and 2020, for instance, South Africa had done about 33 PPP projects, constituting about $4.7 billion. But what would be quite interesting is that within that entire pipeline of portfolio, 75% of that portfolio is largely big PPP projects, meaning projects that are of a value of $52 million going upwards. There's been a little bit of political concern on these smaller PPPs. But that being said, in that portfolio also, there is also some projects that are below, call it $5.2 million, meaning that there has been consideration around the issues of impact. So for instance, there are small PPPs around ecotourism, conservation projects, healthcare, and to some extent, government office accommodation. So I think there's been flexibility to look or to consider small PPPs. But my biggest challenge is that the playing field has not been made even between large scale and small scale PPPs, because the same, call it level of approval that a large scale PPP goes through is the same level of approval that's required for smaller PPPs, which has made it a little bit difficult for the number of smaller PPPs to come in the pipeline, number one. So in my view, I think there is need for a paradigm shift around how then we can try to equalize and normalize the playing field so that more and more smaller PPPs can come on the pipeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Over to you, Saeed. And Saeed wears two hats, one from Canada and one from UNEC.
Oh, thank you, Jyoti. Yes, I agree with what my colleague just said, and I also concur with your survey that it depends upon the level of private financing, how much private financing is required for the project, and what is the size of capital cost of the project. That is fundamentally true. But I will add to what Jian just said, and I'll add to it. In principle, it goes back to the definition of P3s. What we are looking to the P3, what are the elements? Are we looking, does it have the element of private financing? Are we transferring the design or construction obligation to the private sector? Are we transferring maintenance and operational obligation to the private sector? And are we compensating the private sector on performance of the assets, or the performance of the services? So that's the fundamental elements of the PPP definitions. And we have to consider how these elements work together. So for example, if you're looking for, let's say, if you take out operation and maintenance obligations from the definition of the P3, you're left with design, build, finance only. So it changes the definition of small scale PPPs at the same time. And if you take out the element of private financing, it leaves you with design build. It's purely a construction project. So it depends how, as a government, you are defining PPPs, and then it will trigger what is the size, or what is the small scale PPPs. If you have all four elements of PPPs, private financing, design construction obligation, operation and maintenance obligation, performance-based compensation, then you maybe $100 million is a small scale PPP. But if you play around with those elements of PPPs, it will determine what is the size of small scale PPPs. That's in general. But at the end of the day, I think, in my opinion, PPPs are financial transactions. So it goes back to the fundamental element of size of private financing and capital cost. So that's just in general my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. I think that is a good segue to our next set of questions. And this time I'm going to start with Sanida. And so the next set of questions is on the theme of sustainability and community involvement in these small-scale PPPs. And the questions are, how do small-scale PPPs incorporate sustainability principles? And what impact does this have on the project's long-term viability? And in what ways can community involvement be effectively integrated into small-scale PPPs to ensure they meet local needs and gain community support? So let me start with Sanida, and then I will go to Peter, Saeed, Jan, and Nathaniel. Over to you, Sanida.
Thanks, dear. I would like to challenge a little bit, Saeed. What about if there is not any financing at all in terms of money? Financing will come second. but the municipality or that region or that community, if you are talking about sustainability, has a need. So the governance in that area, in that region, has a need to deliver, because it's the responsibility of a government, be it central or local, to deliver certain public services and products. And if the government is not able to offer them in a good quality, fast enough, then definitely I will see a PPP easily enough to go and to find that kind of service delivery to a private entity. And for me, here it starts really working with the need of that specificity in that region and trying to offer the best solution for the people and the community. In this sense, I see most the involvement and developing, since the early stages, a small PPP. So rather, I'm thinking a little bit beyond the standard. Okay, sorry, I had a note there. I didn't know what to do about that. But I was thinking, as Ziad already mentioned in the beginning, thinking a little bit beyond what is written, how it's done. So our dear moderator mentioned that nobody is outside. And then I was thinking, okay, what that municipality is thinking, how really to use to work in the installation of the building to preserve energy and to fulfill with the energy, necessary energy, all that community area here. And local governance cannot do today for tomorrow, but some small businesses working in installation business, they can do it. So we need to define even a way which is fast, is a fast solution, but it's even doable in order to offer this service toward the community. And definitely what's really important when we think about sustainability, for me, it needs to have an impact. Community need to be included, needs to be definitely economically sustainable, and offer and take in consideration the climate changes, environmental consideration, and social sustainability as well.
Thank you, Sanida. Actually, let me go to Jan, since I like this exchange very much. So Jan, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. When I was in the Netherlands between NEOM and NCP, I got a nice present. One of the small PPPs, that was an airport. The private company sent me a nice present, and for a few reasons. And I think I want to connect that to sustainability and people's first. I think one of the success factors of a small PPP is also that small and medium enterprises are involved in the contract. That are small and medium enterprises that live in the community, that provide jobs and security in that region. So instead of the big companies that come in, the small companies. And he sent me a present because for two things. He survived the economic crisis because he had availability payment for the airport, and then the bank provided him still loans. And he was compensated during COVID because he had a contract with an airport. An airport was in a force majeure, and all systems were running. So he survived. He is a small construction company. He has jobs for about 60 people in that region, but that is very important. So the money doesn't go out the region, but sustainable in that region. And I think, looking back, I think that's also a success factor for small scale PPPs in that region. And I think I'd add to that.
Thank you, Jan. Let me go to Mark.
Yes, I fully concur with the role of having a relationship at a very low level, at a local level. What I think is essential in terms of sustainability is to organize a community consultation, which must be extremely well organized. And that is valid for all kinds of PPP, but even more for small PPP. Why? Because the local people, the mayor, is on a day-to-day basis in contact with its community. Let's take an example which exists everywhere in the world: water. Water. Why do we do PPP in water? Under which condition we'll do PPP in water? So then, in order to have the best chances to have a sustainable project accepted by the people, with tariff adaptation, with tariff changes, with many changes which would take place in 20 years. We know that PPP is certainly not a contract between four square. It must be always adapted. How to adapt with the satisfaction of the community? You do that because at the origin, you organize consultation in some detail, and to some extent, you explain to the community that there will be changes if you improve this, if the quality changes, etc. So the example of water is valid for each specific type of project, which can only be developed at a local level. Water is at local level, urban services are at a local level, transport is often at the local level. So you find out by this that what is happening really in a small scale is that you have this replicability that I was mentioning, and then you have less and less complexity in small scale if you enter into this kind of consultation. And then you explain also to the people, to the community, that there could be changes in a tariff, that they will have to accept in a tariff if you have more cost. And then you arrive to the core principle of any kind of project of this kind, which is economic stability and guarantee, essentially, of a fair income. So if you all that together to the community at the origin, then you have far less chances to have a risk on non-sustainable project.
Thank you, Mark. Next, I will go to Saeed.
Yeah, thank you again, Jyoti. I think there are two elements for discussion. One is sustainability and community involvement. From sustainability perspective, again, there are two elements into it. One is the social and economic perspective, and the other one is the environmental perspective. So I'll talk about the social and economic perspective over here. I think sustainability, that it should be affordable, no matter what is the size of the project, whether it's a small scale, large scale PPPs, it has to be affordable. It has to be sustainable in a financial way. And it goes back to the policies of the government, how they are defining or how they are accounting their PPPs, whether small scale or large scale. Are they accounting as a depth in government books? That's another question. And then the question comes in, what is the depth threshold that the government can sustain for the long term? Because it's an obligation. Whether it's a concession-based project, whether it's availability-based PPPs. So that's one of the questions, that we don't want to incur debt to the level that it becomes unsustainable for future generations. So that's the fundamental when you're planning the project, and you have to determine what is the debt threshold as a country or as a province or as a region you can sustain. Is it 35% of GDP? Is it 25% GDP? That's the determination you have to make upfront at the program level. That's from this financial and economic sustainability perspective. And as far as community engagement is concerned, it should be the same as a large PPPs. You communicate with first of all, you have to map out your stakeholders. What are their needs? What are their requirements? You have to communicate the project with them. You have to listen to them. Like you need to have their feedback. You have to consult. Your stakeholder can be your local industry, contractors, designers, financial institutions, banks. So you have to engage and consult with them that, okay, how to structure this deal. And in Canada, most of the time, for every project, when we are doing a project, we do market sounding. So not only we get community input, we also go to the industry and the institutions that, okay, how should we structure this deal? What are the key things? Because we live in a volatile environment, things changes rapidly. So we need to get updated information to structure your project. And then you go out with the project. You engage with the community, you engage with the stakeholders, and sometimes you need to partner with them. You have to bring in like non-for-profit entities to be part of. We did our cancer hospital over there. We had a university, we have a research institution, we have a cancer non-for-profit as part of our project development. So it depends what project you're going with and how do you engage the community into it at a wider level. Thank you.
Thank you, Saeed. Peter and Nathaniel, in addition to those two questions and having heard the other panelists on the responses. I would like you to be even more contextual, coming from Africa, where small scale PPPs actually have taken, as you've said in your previous responses, even more attention. Does this resonate with you? I mean, does small scale PPPs require the same amount of attention in terms of the transaction costs, but at the same time, you're talking about concepts like affordability and sustainability, and then the fiscal impact. So how does that play in your discussions when you're looking at it?
Thank you, Jyoti. I think, in agreement with the sentiments expressed, especially in line of affordability. But for me, I'd like to look at it from a bit of a different lens, because what has tended to happen is that there's a lot of services that especially local government has failed to offer. And what has tended to happen is that private sector players have stepped in and provided services, at times to significant cost to the communities. We're talking about waste management here. We're talking about sanitation services. And what we have found in our part of the world is that people are willing to pay a small fee for quality services. And at some point, the conversation becomes more about the provision of the service, more than the fact that there is a financial aspect to it. And so even when we come to talk about funding and investments, I'll talk a little bit about the kind of structures that would work here. But starting from the premise that you need this service as a basic, then the question becomes, it becomes a question of how do we provide and get the community to own the solution, so that they are willing to pay whatever fee needs to be paid. And one of the ways that there are several ways that we have this currently at play. The first one is engaging the community from the get-go, and especially not necessarily giving them information, but engaging the ones who would actually be participants in the project. So for instance, I'll give a quick example of an irrigation scheme project that is being piloted in one of our sub-county levels. And what has happened is that we've engaged the farmers immediately. And they have bought into the project. So they own the project. And creating that ownership ensures that there is longevity, and they're not bystanders watching somebody from outside implementing. The second thing is through a provision in our constitution that calls for public participation. Assuming it's a service that's being provided by the municipal government, then there are provisions for public participation, so the citizenry are able to speak into it from the word go. And then there's also a provision for local content in the PPP Act, say in Kenya, where every project needs to demonstrate a certain element of input from local businesses, local populations. And again, that brings quite a bit of buy-in. And the last bit I'd like to talk about is a very interesting one that is, that is probably global, but is very effective in this part of the world, which is a cooperative movement. We have a lot of need, especially in the agribusiness sector, in the rural areas, for value addition, for processing. And whenever the municipal governments have attempted to engage in these areas, then as usual, government trying to engage in business really rarely takes off in the way it should be. But when you engage these cooperatives, the producers themselves through their cooperative movements, through a PPP, and they're able to set up, say, manufacturing or finishing factories, then there is longevity because they're processing the same produce that they're producing in their farms. So these are channels that are unique and can be leveraged to great effect to ensure sustainability in terms of longevity and community buy-in. So those are some of the nuanced spaces that we have here that we feel are very well structured that can be leveraged greatly.
Thank you, Peter. Some of the really good examples, actually, which you've shared with us can be applicable to other regions as well. Nathaniel, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so sustainability is here to stay. Whether you're developing a large scale or small scale PPP. So the question really is around how then do we balance sustainability concerns with project viability? So in my view, it's really a question around how then do you structure the project, because the sustainability requirements on the project comes with additional cost on the project, which might make it unviable over the long term. So I think most importantly, what we should then go into is around being creative in the way we structure the projects. I'm looking at the financial creativity around blending instruments, where there could be elements of grant components that are coming in, possibly to take care of the environmental and social aspects of the project. So I think we need to move more around blending instruments per se. So at the end of the day, it's all about how then do we structure it to make sure that it's affordable, it's viable in the long term. Then coming to the second aspect around community involvement, I think just like in the case of Kenya, for instance, in South Africa, this is also supported by legislation. There is legislation called Black Economic Empowerment, which actually tries to address issues of imbalance, historical imbalance issues. And even at a procurement level, there is also Preferential Procurement Framework Act, which then guides procurement to the extent that when one is putting a tender, even for a small PPP, there must be considerations around local content procurement. In some instances, it even prescribes something like 40% local content procurement. So that way, it has been able to ensure local participation, community involvement. But most importantly, I think the community is also being engaged from an early stage in the process, so that here in South Africa, there's something called construction mafia, which if one is not involved at an early stage, they might disrupt the project. So it has also become paramount even for project developers that as one has been awarded the tender, they also engage with the community so that they don't have disruption of the project either during construction or in operations and maintenance. So yeah, let me stop here. Thank you.
Jyoti, if you allow me,
Sure.
Jyoti, allow me, I will use the right of the sovereign, if you don't mind, to come into this conversation. Look, I think that we are not really touching yet on what, in my opinion, is the focus that we need to be taking. I'm not saying that everything that has been said is not valuable. It is. I'm not saying it is not right. It is. But there is the element in small scale PPPs is that I think there are, of course, it's great to engage the local community, the smaller companies. Of course, you want large scale PPPs that involve foreign direct investment and difficult to bring in international investment. And so smaller scale PPPs hopefully could be funded locally. But I think there are two elements that we have not mentioned. One is the preparation cost. What does a municipality, yes, it is nice to say same sustainability, same, studies have to be taken, but they cannot be done. A municipality that has a budget of $50,000 cannot afford to do an environmental impact assessment that will itself cost like $100,000 for it to do a parking meter system within its municipality. This is the kind of thing we need to think about. There is no way that the preparation costs that are usually involved with a PPP project of $3 million on average, we are going to apply this to small scale PPPs. Forget everything else in my mind. The important thing is, how much does it cost to prepare a project? How can we bring these costs down? That's one thing. And the other thing is, the knowledge base that's available at the local communities, at the municipalities. We're talking as if we're expecting, the mayor of a town that has 50,000 people, for him to be like knowledgeable about PPP and what needs to be done. Yeah, That is not going to happen. The mayor of a small town does not know anything about PPP and doesn't have the budget to prepare it. This is the kind of small scale PPP we're talking about. So please, let's reorient this conversation. And instead of talking about like, this is how PPPs are done and what applies to large scale also applies to a small scale, this is, think outside the box, please.
Thank you, Ziad. So I think the context is extremely important. And I think, Jan, I will go back to your definition that, since we have not defined large scale PPPs, should we be even defining small scale PPPs? And then we go to the sustainability question, long-term viability. And are we really putting that same criteria for a $1 billion project to a $50 million project, to a $10 million project, to a $1 million project? And it's not the same. And does the $1 million project go through the same rigor of due diligence, the same gateway process, the same kind of transactional assessments, and the same kind of feasibility studies, the same kind of affordability analysis as $1 billion, as a $1 million? So keep that context in mind. And I want to take one of the comment which is on the chat. It's from Aid Omesh. He's saying that the debt threshold, or what we call fiscal ceiling, it has a large impact on doing PPPs, especially if the country gross debt, public debt is high. Now, given that context, that is in context for me, it's in context of a large scale PPP that we are talking about $1 billion or even a $500 million project. If the entire public debt ceiling is taken by such a big project or a couple of these different projects, these small scale PPPs don't even come on the radar. And these the capacity, the financial capacity of these agencies who are undertaking these small projects, they don't even come on the radar of these fiscal ceilings, fiscal assessments. Many times the revenue capacity of these local, these procurement agencies who are undertaking these small projects, they don't even have the ability to even report on such things. So I think, and that takes us to then, and given the Ziad's comment on this particular topic, the next theme is actually exactly this, on funding and investment. How does the funding and investment landscape of small scale PPPs differ from larger projects? And there has to be a difference. We cannot put them in the same category. We can't. So please be, I would ask the panelists to be more, go ahead and say what you truly believe, and be more out of the box, thinking what you see in reality. So actually, I'm going to start with Peter Kabuki.
Thank you. And like I said, I think this, and thank you, Ziad, for taking us to this aspect of things. The reality is a lot of small-scale PPPs will be geared at addressing social infrastructure, community needs. And in our region, the focus for the last 10, 15 years has been on large-scale PPPs, where you have international investors who can see commercial viability and probably have deep pockets to do the initial project preparation. But for small-scale PPPs, especially defined by whom, in this case, subnational governments, and serving whom, in this case, local communities, then there definitely has to be a different lens. One of the things that we are grappling with right now, because as I said, last year is when, for instance, Kenya enacted an amendment to the PPP Act that allows for our county governments to procure through PPP. What we are seeing now, and even conversations with our PPP directorate this week has revealed, is that a majority of the projects reaching their desk for approval are immediately showing commercial non-viability. there's a big challenge with that are prepared by contracting authorities, which are the municipalities. And like Ziad said, there's also a capacity issue, and that needs to be addressed as well in a big way. But in terms of commercial viability, then there has to be a different way of thinking. Now, this can be solved by financing arrangements, but it can also be solved by processes. One of the things that our neighboring country, Uganda, has done is to create a very different process plan for small projects that minimizes cost. The timelines are shorter, they're standardizing documentation, they're offering incentives beyond what is typical for projects that they consider to be large-scale PPP projects. And this is bearing fruit for them. So there's a way that this can be handled. For instance, in Kenya, we have several fees that are accruing to PPP projects that can be waived, so that the proprietors of small PPP projects do not have to pay those kind of fees, which reduces the cost. But then the other thing that has been mentioned is the use of blended finance, for instance, and dedicating some funds, whether it's government funds or having other parties, collaborations, partnerships that can put aside or dedicate project preparation funds that minimize the overall cost of offering the service or the PPP project. Those are things that we need to look at. We could also look at scaling by bundling, where, for instance, you have several subnational counties procuring a similar service or from the private sector, which if put together, then can benefit from economies of scale. But we definitely do have to think about it differently based on the scale of project that we want to implement and by who. So I think there are ways around it, and I think we can do it if we put our minds to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Sanida, same question. I would like you to think about the scale of where you're coming from. The scale of projects in terms of large is very different than a country like Canada, for example. A country like Saudi Arabia, for example. So even the scale which we are talking about, large versus small, is different for your country. And how the local governments are functioning. Are they independent? Are they actually completely dependent on the central government for their revenues? How are they actually in a position of procuring these PPP projects? And what differences are they, or how are they adjusting to the market, which may not be even there for these very, very small projects?
Yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, Albania is, at least in the last census, 2.8 million of inhabitants. So let's see in the last census how much we are still here. But all the entire region, the Western Balkan region, is more or less, I don't know, 16, 17 million of inhabitants. So if we are talking, if you go down in the municipality, even municipality that has even, I don't know, 20,000 of inhabitants, even like capital city, 1 million of inhabitants, because they are like, covering, I think it's a trend that everything is happening in capital city rather than in other cities which are far away a little bit from the center. So definitely it's another thing to do a PPP in a big municipality, which has a lot of incomes, despite what central government is sending them in terms of transfers. And talking about a small municipality, which they are not able to cover their expenses of their usual things, not even with the transfers that the central government is sending them, because they are not able to generate much more incomes, because they have not less capacity, but less businesses, less taxes, less tariffs, less construction. So definitely very much less potential to even generate incomes, that with these incomes, they can generate much more, let's say, services to offer or investments and so on and so forth. So definitely it's really much important to differentiate. But how I see it in my view is that we need to create, when we are talking about small scale, the process per se should be a little bit much more, not little bit, but too many standardized, so easygoing, and not doing very much kind of a big things or case by case. In small scales PPP, the process, starting even from the assessment of needs, then developing a projects, then having viable projects, should be much more standardized, which takes less resources, less time, less cost, because it will be a shorter in time frame, less money invested, definitely even less risk. But if we want investors and private capital, definitely we need to ensure them that their money, at least their money, in that what they are investing is back. But the small PPP, I'm seeing not only that we have a private company here, or several small SMEs working together with a municipality, for example, but I would like to see even as a triangle of cooperation with even local banks. Because if a local bank is seeing that a project is feasible, in sense that, yes, the municipality has its own assets, there is a need assessment really evaluated, the business person has the capacity, has the technology, has the people to really offer that kind of service, then this project automatically becomes bankable even for a local bank. So I'm trying to connect this even with a project implementation, project design implementation, but even where to finance. I can call really a small PPP, even if in a small village, the community there want to construct or reconstruct a road. So can you imagine, first, the community, so people living in that village, businesses that are operating in that village are willing to spend their own money, so crowdfunding, source funding, and so on and so forth, to really say, okay, 50% of the investments I want to do because I'm living in this area. And instead of, I don't know, buying a car 1 in 2-3 years, for me, it's much more feasible to really invest in this road because it will be much more feasible tomorrow that even a bus can come by this road. So in this sense, we need to work, Zayed, even with the municipality way of thinking, because what I see in my countries and all the region, big scale, case to case, that I don't know, PPP, big PPP that take a long time to really develop, are done in central government. Meanwhile, in local governance, we need to work a little bit more in terms of how they can define themselves to create really partnership with local communities. When I'm saying local, it's not only people, it's businesses, it's private banks, whomever is interested and has an interest to live in that area and had identified the need really for investments. Then believe me that if all are in the same table, they will be much more feasible to really define even a model which financially it's a sound. I mean, municipality, yes, totally agree. They don't have all the expertise, but they can create, I don't know, a special purpose vehicle. They can found a company which is will share with the share of the municipality, then community and business, and then they together can really start up and offering a kind of service and then build up together a project. Always I'm thinking in terms even of a former politician, I rather would like to see in the future more entrepreneurial politics. So politician that thinks even in terms like they own an enterprise. Meanwhile, with a big and huge difference. If I own an enterprise or a business, I'm striving for profit maximization, or at least to have a profit because I want to survive in the market. But if a politician, be it a mayor or a minister, see themselves as an entrepreneur, but with a big difference that they don't want to maximize the profit because their profit, it is the vice versa. They need to maximize the product delivery, the public delivery to their community. So if they think smart enough and fast enough, I think that they can achieve more. Second, which is much more important, is second is the third, because the finance and the training, but the new legal and policy framework we need to develop. I think that all in our countries, we have, I don't know, laws, legislations, and frameworks that when you read in the paper, they are really good. Meanwhile, when you tend to implement them, it goes, I mean, my God, 1 or 2 years or 3 years, and you are still in the process of negotiation or building up a project. Meanwhile, in small scale project, you need a very standardized approach, a framework which is helping and enhancing a very fast solution and very fast decision making, mitigating the risk and being in line even with the budget law.
Thank you, Sanida. You've actually delved into our next topic, and I'm going to go to Saeed now. And there's an interesting comment on the chat from Ilan. And he's saying transaction costs are a key constraint when trying to leverage the required expertise to structure and procure a small scale PPP. And I think we are all on the same page. So he's saying that while he was working at IFC, they worked in a water project in Benin, on developing small-scale water PPP transaction, and they piloted a program in which they developed an initial framework for the water PPP model, closed the initial pathfinder deals, and then developed a replication model with public authorities to leverage local advisors. So Saeed, and this is a little bit of a follow-up. Please mute your mics if you're not speaking. I can hear somebody, background noise from someone. Just following, could you please mute your mic? Following up on Senida and Peter's mention of some of these policy elements, Rupa, if you can please mute the person's mic, I would appreciate it. So Saeed, over to you to some of the things which Senida, Peter, and Elon they have mentioned.
Yeah, thank you, Jyoti. I'll come back to Ziad's point. I think that's very important to consider, because it's the cost of planning, cost of developing the project. That is very important, especially when you're developing a small scale PPPs, and also the cost of pursuit by the private sector. That is also very important, because now if the cost of pursuit is high and the return to the private sector is low as compared to the cost of pursuit, they're not going to come to play with you. So that's fundamental to the development of any type of P3, whether large scale or small scale. But it becomes more critical in small scale PPPs because of the scale of the project. I think one few points I have it over here that coming to the funding and investment landscape for small scale PPPs, it will differ definitely. In my opinion, the landscape will change from project financing to commercial financing. That will be the fundamental, I think, from financing perspective. And I'm not a financial expert, but that's what my thinking. It will become more equity-driven project as compared to debt equity-driven projects. So that's another change I see. And from the market capacity, I think it will be local institutions or local market-driven projects. As the other also meant, nobody is going to come from abroad to participate in the small scale projects unless there's something else add to it. But the projects will be more, or they should be structured around more local institutions. And maybe in some cases, government has to look if they can become an equity partner with the private sector. So that's something in order to reduce the cost of pursuit and the cost of private financing. So those type of things we have to be mindful of. The small scale PPPs also provide a good opportunity for unsolicited P3s or PPPs, that the private sector can come and they can propose a project. And one thing that is very important, that you need to have a framework, and we have developed such a framework here in Canada, that there is not a procurement-driven approach, because in procurement, you have to be a competitive nature and all those sort of things you have to be mindful of. But the philosophy should be infrastructure investment approach when you're looking into unsolicited PPPs. So that's something you have to develop, how to look into it. And we have to be mindful, because as soon as the government money comes into the play, you tend to lead into the procurement domain of the projects. So you have to be mindful of competitive nature. But if the private sector is just bringing in the money, they're investing it, and they're recouping their investments by generating revenue, I don't think there is a competitive issue around it. But we have to be mindful that we are not creating those mini monopolies around here. So it's a whole thing you have to be mindful of. But that is something that can tap those small scale PPPs. That's important. Another element to it, I think small scale PPPs allows you, it gives you a ladder to develop the local capacity, because now the risk is low, complexity is low in general. So you develop those local capacity into the PPP portfolio development or PPP market development. So that's something that you are making the local industry, local institutions, local contractors to be ready for next stage of PPPs. So that's another element that we can look into it. So I think those are some of the key points I had in my mind. unless I'm missing something. Yeah, that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Saeed. I will go to Mark on this question. A little bit of follow-up on this discussion, especially on the policy and the regulatory framework on broader small-scale PPPs, Mark, but also at the transaction level, which we just heard from Sunida, from Peter, from Saeed, and also in the comments from Ilan. Have you seen such examples where at the local PPPs at a very small scale, these framework contracts and these agreements have worked very well? And how do you think they will, we can actually, replicate, as you said in your previous comment?
Yes, first of all, I'm limit all my comments on the type of PPP which is promoted by UNICE. There's a definition, it's clear, and I don't, but otherwise it's much more complicated to develop my point. So essentially what is important to bear in mind is that at a low level or large level, the situation is the same in terms of planning infrastructure project, and especially public infrastructure projects. Each municipality, each region has a duty to plan some infrastructure project. And the local, we know what they are. We spoke about water. We could speak of bus services. We could speak of local power distribution, etc. So each at lower level, that is always necessary. Now, how do they do currently without PPP? Still, they are having the cost of planning. Still, they have the cost of preparing. Still, they have the cost of environment. Still, they need to justify to their constituents that what they are doing is economically viable and sound. And if they don't do that with the project that they are developing in procurement, then they are in trouble. So currently, normally, each local government has already a procurement organization, service, strategy, which end up with having to find a private company to build something, to render a service, etc. So what is the difference between that and what we try to do with PPP? It's not that much. It's not that much. What is the main difference when you are on the ground and you find out how they do it? The main difference is that for traditional procurement, going up to design and build, etc., then they have a framework, they have a procedure, they have a process. They have done that for many, many years often. They have to do it, no choice. So then what is missing, essentially, in my view, which links to high transaction costs at the low level, is that why high transaction costs? Essentially, because what they have using on a day-to-day basis and with a framework, with practice, with precedent, with cases, with standard contract, they don't have that currently for PPP and concession. So, and you may remember that the World Bank, it took the World Bank more than 10 years to issue standard bidding procedure, for instance. And from there to issue contract within this that more or less everyone is using in traditional procurement. So what we consider ourselves at the level of a center of excellence is that what is urgent is to put PPP at the same level of very practical documentation, procedure, which are coming from the ground. And the people from the ground will easily understand that what they are doing is not much different. It is to some extent different, but the environmental impact study will be the same, whether the project is done in PPP or a water project or in design and build or highway project or the tunnel project, it will be the same. And so the question is to bring this knowledge, in my view, much more than having to try to consider view of reducing so much transaction costs, because then transaction costs, if you look at countries which have a lot of those projects, the transaction costs are quite low because the municipalities are used to do that. So a way to limit the transaction cost and at the same time to bring a much better level of governance is that to put at their disposal for PPP what they have currently at their disposal after for over 20 years for other kind of project. And that's what essentially has been done at the level of UNICE, is to put at disposal of everyone a framework law on concession and PPP, put at the disposal evaluation methodology, put at the disposal how in practice you should develop consultations, etc. So I really think that here we have a big chance between us, because the municipalities are ready to go further, but they don't understand. They're afraid. They hear always of PPP is very complex. Everyone, it's very complex. But in fact, for many situations, it is not that complex. It is something that they have been doing. PPP is just doing one step further from design and build. So then what you have to consider is, why do you do PPP rather than traditional procurement? And from there, to justify that PPP will help them to have more projects for essential public services accomplished than without PPP due to budget constraint. So I really feel that here we have a very good case, especially with what UNICE has already done, in order to go a real step further in developing PPP at a much lower transaction costs than the one which are currently understood.
Thank you, Mark. I'm going to go to Jan because Jan has posted some comments, and I would like for Jan to expand on, especially this comment where small PPPs do not influence GDP debt financing, otherwise they're not small scale. And then also as a follow-up to what Mark said, that is that municipalities are ready to go on PPPs. They're not that hard to do. But they, there are other factors which they should be looking at in terms of their traditional procurement as well. So over to you, Jan. And you have 2 minutes because we only have 8 minutes left, and I want to give the floor to Ziad and perhaps somebody from UNEC as well who wants to speak. So over to you, Jan.
Yes, maybe I give examples to make it in the 2 minutes, and I agree with Ziad. I still think we're talking about large-scale PPPs and try to transform it to small PPPs. And I give you a few examples. I did a ferry project in Sri Lanka. Everybody knows how buses are running in Sri Lanka. The government wanted to do it as a PPP. The ferry boats had air conditioning, had Wi-Fi on board, had first class and second class. It was a cruise boat that will survive in Saudi Arabia, but not in. So the government had troubles understanding the PPP concept. It's not capacity building. It's thought if we do it as a PPP, we can do a lot of things. And it's the same. I see politicians adding sustainability on the project and local impact and more fancy things on the project. But if you do a project, for example, in Albania, where I did a test on the procurement laws, no PPP will survive there. Because Albania and many other countries, it's not judging, but most tenders are on the lowest price, and PPPs will never win. So you do a lot of work. Unsolicited proposals. Syed, I'm happy with unsolicited proposals, but from of the 193 countries in the world, only 5 can handle unsolicited proposals because it's corruption. It's only offers from the private sector that need government funding. And then you transform it to a local government who do not understand unsolicited proposal, where the legal framework is not capable of doing unsolicited proposal. Maybe in Canada, we did it in the Netherlands. Korea is one of the best countries to do unsolicited proposal, but not a community in Kenya. So I think we have to go back to our offices and think, how can we help communities with small PPPs without making them more complex than they already are? Where can we shift things out of a PPP to make it more viable for communities together? Don't add things on it, slow them down. Like what Mark said, use experience of projects that were successful, but don't add things to it. If Kenya needs a special framework, make a special framework. But if a country doesn't need a special framework and the procurement law is enough, don't do a special framework. Look at solutions that will speed up PPPs in this context.
Thank you, Jan. So we have 5 minutes and just closing remarks, and just a reminder to all the attendees, we have a session coming every 2 weeks on this particular topic. Please reach out to us and attend and also contribute. So I think I will give the floor to Ziad and Tony, and to close and to just say closing, anything else you would want to share.
I will let Tony go first.
Thank you very much, Ziad. It's good to see so many of you. I haven't seen Jan for a while. For example, Mark, of course, Ziad, my chair, and Jyoti, you as well. So it's a pleasure to be involved in this endeavor. And as Ziad mentioned at the very beginning, in his kind introductory words, we are very much looking forward to work jointly with WAPPP on the same endeavor, because we also think that small scale PPPs are important for many of our countries, and I'm not just talking about the small and middle income countries, even UNCE countries, like for example Lithuania. They are doomed to do small scale PPPs because this is what their market is dictating, and there is often, and I'm sure that you will at some point in one of your discussions, discuss it, that there is often a conflict between, say, PPP units and say ministries of finance, because ministries of finance want the numbers, right? They want to justify why a PPP unit exists, and they are always looking at numbers and how many projects they are managing. So again, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be with you, and I pass over to Ziad.
Tony, thank you so much, and really appreciate your efforts, personal efforts on your part to make this happen. And your experience in Lithuania that you told me about is really impressive. Tony was telling me about the school he visited and the school program there, etc. And really, it brings to mind what I was talking about. We need to think outside the box. We need to think of small towns. We're not talking. This is why the idea to me of saying, well, it's a small PPP is going to be different if it is in let's say France than it is in Lesotho. I would like please for us to think differently. A small scale PPP is a small scale PPP. It doesn't matter the size of the GDP of the country or the size of the country. I think to me it is important to define small scale PPP as PPP in a small community. It's a community that does not have in its governance the ability to understand, to take CP3P certification, and to go by, reinvent the wheel every time. It needs standardization. It needs standardized documentation. It needs not somebody, to reinvent anything, but to be given what to do. And it needs to be, it's a community that does not have the money to spend on doing extensive financial studies and extensive, look, again, I say a street lighting project in a small town, it does not need environmental impact assessment. So we need to think about these things. This is, and I think we can be off to changing really what our profession stands for. We have been seen so far as being, the people that want to do, we want Rolls Royces every time. Let's not think of Rolls Royces. We need, I don't want to say a brand name and somebody object to it, but we need a Volkswagen, in the sense of a vehicle for the people. This is what we need. So I want to thank very much all the participants, the discussants today. I want to thank the participants that listened to us so patiently. I think, you know, with more time, we would have liked to hear more from you guys, the participants, but please come back. Next sessions, we're going to make sure there's more time for the audience to participate. Jyoti, thank you so much for moderating this session. I'll give the word back to you. Over to you.
All right, thank you, Ziad, and thank you, everyone. I think even though audience were not able to participate, I was going through the chat, very useful chat, and comments from your own experience. So I think we look forward to just continuing this discussion. And as we can see, a very wide range of responses to the same question. And I think that's what we wanted to bring out, that there is such a need for small scale PPP discussion in the market today, because we do not have a full understanding, or we do have understanding and we do not understand somebody else's perspective. And then it goes from the other side as well, the private sector side, the public sector side, and the stakeholders who are the beneficiaries. So a very rich discussion. Thank you so much, and special thank you to all the panelists who really put your thinking hats. I put you on the spot on a question and you came up with beautiful answers. So thank you very much, and till next time.